Previously on Wolfenstein Guns, Part 1. I'll start by saying that while I recognize the significance of the first two Wolfenstein games developed by Muse Software, I'm going to bypass them outright. Britain needed a cheap and easy-to-produce weapon to re-equip her forces in the event of a German amphibious invasion. And thus, the Sten was born. So stay tuned, I should be able to release Part 2 soon enough. Oh, shit. Oh, how long's it been since my last upload? It couldn't have been more than a week. Ah, fuck. Picking up where we left off, we now arrive at the modern Wolfenstein timeline, and with it,
assload of guns.
So without further ado, let's delve into the guns of Wolfenstein, the new, I've just been informed by myself that I've managed to completely bypass the guns of Wolfenstein 2009, which I suppose warrants an explanation. So in summary, Wolfenstein 2009 has a total of 9 weapons, 6 of which are present in RTCW's weapon roster. Consequently, in the interest of not repeating the same info, like Bethesda, we'll pretend Wolfenstein 2009 doesn't exist. Before that, though, I believe it's pertinent to recognize the level of customization Wolfenstein 2009 brought to the series. It added a level of attachment diversity that we didn't see again until the release of the new Colossus, allowing for a greater sandbox experience overall, which I believe deserves some recognition. Now where were we? Oh yeah. So without further ado, starting with the New Order, let's delve into the guns of Machine Games Wolfenstein. Starting off, we have the Allies' response to Germany's increasingly advanced small arms, which we only saw for one mission. It's your boy, the submachine gun, aka the stylistic Thompson. Despite standing out as the only Allied small arm we see throughout the entire modern timeline of Wolfenstein games, its performance is pretty underwhelming. Not only due to its general lack of available ammunition, but also because of its low damage output, which in turn forces you to exhaust copious amounts of ammo that you are unable to replace most of the time. In comparison to its main competitor, the STG-46, the difference is night and day. With the STG-46 you're able to constantly replenish your ammo, and the STG-46's single fire mode allows you to fire it like a DMR, giving you great range potential. And finally, it just hits so much harder. In summary, even though it's a cool addition and is genuinely satisfying to use, in the words of Fergus,
"You see any Nazi firearms, you take them. Like to be better than ours."
Next up, we have every Luger. They all almost exclusively act as the player's primary stealth weapon, aside from the knife and hatchet. But like most Wolfenstein pistols, outside of stealth, there's really no reason to use them. Unless you're experimenting, or using the Kampf pistol. Moving on, we arrive at the boomstick, or just the double-barrel shotgun. A gun I'm sure we all wish just stayed in our inventory. It appears twice in the New Order, and for about half of the Old Blood, and for a few minutes in the new Colossus. But now that I've mentioned it, I'm gonna pretend it doesn't. As far as the New Order and the Old Blood are concerned, it performs virtually the same. And when I say performs, I mean performs. So much so that, I don't know, makes you feel like you're the ancestor of a certain demon slayer? But that could just be me. In short, when you find yourself having an unquenchable desire to render Nazis into Swiss cheese, look no further. Back to the gun that just blew the Thompson out of the water, it's of course the glorious and ever-satisfying STG-46. By the way, I'm just going to go ahead and group the New Order's STG-46 and the Old Blood's STG-46T together, since they're virtually identical. The only differences between the two being the STG-46T's faster fire rate, lower recoil, and useless burst mode. Given the fact that I've pretty much already covered the STG-46's in-game performance, let's rewind for a moment. The STG-46 evidently takes its inspiration from the historical STG-44 and MP-43 assault rifles, albeit with some added chunkiness. Although it paints a more unconventional aesthetic, it helped to promote Wolfenstein's at the time new futuristic identity, while remaining recognizably World War II themed, allowing for some degree of immersion. This remains true with many other guns as well, like the MG46 and the previously mentioned Luger, but I digress. You may be somewhat surprised to know that while the Germans never managed to make an STG-46, they did make an STG-45. That was essentially a cheaper and more simplified version of the STG-44, encompassing many alterations, the most notable of which being the larger handguard, meant to reduce heat absorption. In the end, despite being easier to produce, the STG-45 barely made it past the prototype phase before the end of the war. Next up, we have our first hybrid gun, designated the AR Marksman, and initially functions as a pretty standard scope DMR, only for it to pull a complete 180 on us once BJ reaches the Mund. From then on, it can be alternated between two different modes, if you will. The first being that of the original DMR, and then the new energy-powered configuration, which in a nutshell turns the Marksman rifle into a weaker version of the Laserkraftwerk. And while still useful, it can tend to quickly burn through its battery due to its rapid rate of fire. So as a whole, the sniper mode is pretty effective, and more importantly, extremely satisfying to get headshots with. On the other hand, the energy mode, despite being underwhelming compared to the Big Daddy LKW, can still prove valuable in a pinch. Now let's talk about something explosive. The Kampf pistol, despite sounding deceptively weak, is the most powerful gun in the Old Blood. Well, per shot anyway. Thanks to its rocket ammunition, which while only being as powerful as your standard stick grenade, detonates on impact, affording you unrivaled killing power on larger groups of enemies. The same can't be said, however, for the Kampf pistol's 1961 counterpart, which unfortunately suffers from the same issue the War Machine does in Black Ops 2. That being, when you fire the fucking grenades, they bounce instead of blowing up on impact, consequently removing any concept of accuracy when firing the Kampf pistol, as you can never truly know where your grenades will fuck off to once you fire them. So the question is, why? Why would they alter a gun that had been virtually perfected in the Old Blood? Why, for upgrades, of course. Indeed, due to TNC's new upgrade system, every gun remains in a relatively average state when you first obtain it, to allow for the use of potential upgrades to different aspects of each gun. And while this works completely fine for most guns, for the Kampf pistol you're forced to upgrade it to revert it back to its effective Old Blood state. Kampf pistol aside, time to finish off the remaining STGs. Starting off chronologically with the STG-1960, rather than just being a more advanced looking STG-46, the rifle design seems to mirror the next evolutionary stage in Germany's real-life assault rifle development, that being the HK-G3. I'm basing this on a few shared components and its overall similar silhouette. As for stats, it does less damage overall than its predecessor, but makes up for it with a high fire rate, which thankfully doesn't create all that much recoil, allowing you to stay on target for long periods of time. Continuing on, the effectiveness of the STG-1960 is further enhanced when you encounter its rocket launcher attachment, which is basically a precursor to the Kampf pistol. Needless to say, this makes for a righteous combination, overall granting you much more versatility when dealing with the Hitlerites. 1 year later, we make a return to a more STG-46 reminiscent rifle, with the STG-1961, which on the surface performs about how you expect. But as you all know, it's not really about the guns themselves in the new Colossus, it's the upgrades. First off, you have the Jungle Mag, which just gives you the ability to alternate to another magazine instead of completing a full reload. Useful, but nothing special. Next, you have the AP rounds, a must-have for the STG-61, as they convert all assault rifle ammunition you pick up into AP bullets, increasing bullet damage to armored forces, so virtually every enemy type. Finally, we have the Marksman Scope, the only telescopic sight in the game, granting the player far more accuracy in long-range engagements. But that's not all. Somehow the scope allows you to change the STG-61's firing mode, and in doing so makes the bullets far more deadly, which funnily enough incentivizes the player not to use the scope, as it's far more powerful when dual-wielded, especially when paired with the aforementioned AP bullets, nearly making the STG-1961 the most powerful gun in the game. Nearly. Sticking with the guns of the new Colossus, let's talk about the Machine Pistol 61. Out of every gun in the new Colossus, the MP61 is the most common gun you'll come across. Based on its designation, we can assume it's a continuation of the German MP series of submachine guns that began in World War I with the MP18. And like the STG-61, it appears to be a futuristic take on a certain German World War II era weapon. Apologies. Anyhow, unknown World War II weapon aside, the MP61's distinct barrel seems to be inspired by the MP18. I just figured I'd add that in. Moving on. In-game, when you first encounter the MP61, it functions very similar to the futuristic Thompson, minus the ammo problem. Its overall damage is pretty light, but it makes up for this later on thanks to its upgrades. Its best by far is the nail gun upgrade, which increases the MP61's bullet damage while sacrificing bullet velocity. Secondly, you have the integral suppressor. Contrary to what I said earlier about the Luger being the main stealth weapon across the modern Wolfensteins, TNC's MP61 can be much more effective in this regard, especially when coupled with the nail gun upgrade. Finally, you have the drum mag, which doubles your ammo capacity, allowing you to greatly enhance your killing potential, and is virtually a must-have without the nail gun upgrade due to the MP61's low base damage. Next up, we have both the MG46 and MG60. Based on concept art, we can deduce that the MG46 is meant to resemble the MG42. It features the by now familiar assortment of futuristic enhancements and components, the most prominent of which being the minigun-inspired barrels, that appear to be 4 individual MG42 barrels linked together, all powered by a side-mounted electric motor. Strangely enough, despite being based on the MG42, it sports a distinctive selective fire MG34 trigger instead of a standard MG42 trigger. Performance-wise, I mean, what else needs to be said? Next, we have the MG60, which despite being converted into an energy weapon, still retains some hallmarks of the MG46. It features the same MG42 grip and the familiar coupled MG42 barrels, although the barrels don't appear to rotate like the MG46. Oh, and the trigger more closely resembles an MG42 trigger. As for its Nazi killing abilities, think MG46 but with a slower fire rate, along with pseudo-armor piercing ammunition. The Bombenschuss, literally just bomb shot in English, is the only bolt-action rifle in the modern Wolfenstein timeline. Despite it generally being outgunned by every other available weapon, the Bombenschuss makes up for this with high damage and great range capability. Although, thanks to the inherently close-quarters nature of Wolfenstein, you'll often find yourself just quick-scoping motherfuckers at close range. Granted, there are still moments throughout the campaign that give you that Carl Fairburn feel. Overall, the Bombenschuss is a solid addition to the Old Blood roster that satisfyingly lives up to its title. Back to the new Colossus, I'm just going to speedrun every remaining turret class weapon. First, we have the Lasergewehr, arguably the best turret gun in the new Colossus due to its absolutely insane range. Its abilities are further enhanced thanks to TNC's overpowered leaning mechanic, which makes for a truly deadly combo. Continuing on, the Dieselgewehr is a different take on a flamethrower. Instead of firing a continuous flow of flames, it fires individual fireball projectiles, which create splash damage upon impact, allowing it to usefully function as both an indirect and direct fire weapon. Next up, we have the Hammergewehr, a gun I didn't even know was a shotgun up until recently. The Hammergewehr is a pretty decent and equally satisfying gun to use. Its only caveat is its terrible accuracy, forcing you to get up close and personal. And finally, we have conceptually the most revolutionary handheld gun the Germans have ever made. that being the Obergewehr. The Obergewehr appears to take inspiration from Doom's famous BFG, which emits very similar balls of energy as the Obergewehr, albeit in a different color. As a whole, it's a very badass addition to the franchise. The main problem the Obergewehr suffers from, besides its slow charging speed, is its complete lack of appearances throughout the entire game. Seriously, throughout the entire main campaign, you'll only ever encounter it twice, making it nearly irrelevant in the grand scheme of things. Moving on, we're down to our last 4 guns. To make things interesting, I will reserve what I believe to be the most powerful modern Wolfenstein gun for last, as a finale of sorts. And with that said, let's finish this. First up, we have the 1946 Shockhammer, the first iteration of the Shockhammer series of combat shotguns. We first encounter the Shockhammer in the first half of the game, after we lose our beloved double-barrel shotgun. Although I must admit, it does serve as a worthy replacement throughout the close quarters halls of Castle Wolfenstein. During the second half of the game, it functions as a competitor to the double-barreled sawed-off shotgun. And while it does less damage compared to the sawed-off, it makes up for this with a significantly larger ammo count, along with its dual-wield capability. Aesthetically speaking, the Shockhammer 1946 stands out the most compared to its successors, as it sports a standard 1946-era wooden stock/grip with a distinct carrying handle. Fast forwarding 14 years later, we got the successor to the Shockhammer 1946 with the Shockhammer 1960. Apart from looking radically different from its predecessor, it performs more or less the exact same way. The only major gameplay addition is the inclusion of a new ammunition type, the shrapnel shell, which basically functions like an extremely ricochet-prone buckshot. They can prove useful in ultra-confined spaces. In any other space besides this, you are basically playing the lottery. You can just use them like regular slugs, but you'll have to be at near point-blank range to hit all your shots. In other words, just use the regular shells. Now, as we reach the finale, I feel our next gun deserves an honorable mention for first place. Guys, could it be anything else? It's the 1961 Shockhammer. Visually speaking, the Shockhammer 1961 follows nearly the same design as the previous Shockhammer. The only large difference is the inclusion of a third barrel, along with the fact that the barrels will also all rotate after each shot. But like all TNC's guns, you can't talk about them without factoring in the upgrades, especially the Shockhammer. Firstly, you have the Ricochet upgrade, which is just the shrapnel mod from TNO. No real change here. The extended magazine doubles your ammo capacity and synergizes well with our next upgrade, but is by no means required. And finally, it's the rotor. It's times like these that make me ask myself, how does one simply describe the rotor? I could try, but I would only be doing you a disservice. So just see for yourself. Need I say more? Now, before I cover the LKW, let's talk about its opposite number for a minute, the Dieselkraftwerk. The Dieselkraftwerk, as many of you know, only appears in the Wyatt timeline in the new Colossus, meaning I barely ever use it. But to give a full picture, the Dieselkraftwerk's gimmick, unlike the LKW, is that it fires button-activated sticky grenades. The cool thing about these sticky grenades is that you can fire them on enemies without alerting them. Meaning in theory it's possible to plant grenades on every enemy in a given area and blow them all up at once, which makes for some decent clips. So the Dieselkraftwerk's problem is not that it isn't a good gun, the LKW just overshadows it. Fergus. Mainly thanks to its supercharge upgrade, which allows you to one-shot any enemy, even much heavier enemies like the Citadel and Destroyer, with a shot to the eye. Fergus. In tandem with its way better accuracy and range due to its laser beams. Fergus. Which I believe renders TNC's Laser Kraftwerk the undeniable GOAT gun of the modern Wolfenstein timeline. And finally, because it appeared in the New Order, and kind of became BJ's signature weapon, it almost feels wrong not to use it. Fergus. But hey, I could just be biased. And with that, I've officially gone over every usable firearm in the Wolfenstein franchise, spanning from Castle Wolfenstein all the way to the most modern release of Wolfenstein. That being, of course, Wolfenstein Youngblood. Most of the guns Youngblood features are just recycled from the new Colossus, some even with new names, like the Kugelgewehr, or the Blitzgewehr, or the Kugelhammer, or the Laserhammer, or the Dieselhammer, or the Uberhammer. Oh, okay, you get the point. The rest retain their original names. Although somewhat reminiscent of Wolfenstein 2009, Youngblood makes a return to a money-based upgrade system. Except Youngblood went the Modern Warfare 2019 route and decided to give the player access to 15 attachments each for standard guns, and 12 for heavy guns. This comes out to a remarkable 159 total gun attachments. To put this in perspective, even if you add together every gun attachment from Wolfenstein 2009 through to the new Colossus, twice, Youngblood still has more attachment availability. I suspect the reason for this was to make up for Youngblood's lack of weapon originality, as well as to add to the sandbox experience. But I digress. Needless to say, I won't be covering every Youngblood attachment, as that would require far more brain cells than I would likely be able to produce in my lifetime. That being said, Youngblood does in fact add in one original gun, that being the machine pistol. In-game, the machine pistol looks and functions virtually the same as a real-life mini Uzi. It even sounds the exact same. Take a listen. So yeah, basically the mini Uzi. The irony of this is that the mini Uzi was historically designed by a Jewish man named
Uziel Gal.
But I suppose this is quite tame compared to everything the Germans have copied off the Jews in the Wolfenstein universe. And on that random note, I suppose I will conclude the video. In all honesty, I'm not quite sure what to talk about in the next one. So please leave any non-Youngblood video suggestions in the comments. Also, feel free to point out any mistakes I may have made, and I'll be sure to put them in a pinned comment. Many thanks for watching. Bye for now.